Afternoon, everybody. Today we'd have a special edition of what I thought would be apt for Good Friday. I'm going to do a quick learning on the science of the crucifixion. It is important to understand that from the beginning, Jesus would have been in an excellent physical condition. As a carpenter by trade, he participated in physical labor. In addition, he spent much of his ministry traveling on foot across the countryside. His stamina and strength were very well developed. With that in mind, it is clear just how much he suffered. If this torture could break a man in such good shape, it must have been a horrific experience. We'll start with the agony in Gethsemane. After the Passover celebration, Jesus takes his disciples to Gethsemane to pray. During his anxious prayer about the events to come, Jesus sweats drops of blood. This is a rare medical condition called hematohidrosis, during which the capillary blood vessels that feed the sweat glands break down. Blood released from the vessels mixes with the sweat, therefore, the body sweats drops of blood. This condition results from mental anguish or high anxiety, a state Jesus expresses by praying, "My soul is deeply grieved to the point of death," referenced in Matthew chapter 26, verse 28. Hematohidrosis makes the skin tender, so Jesus' physical condition worsens slightly. Traveling from Pilate to Herod and back again, Jesus walks approximately 2.5 miles. He had not slept and he had been mocked and beaten. In addition, his skin remains tender from the hematohidrosis. His physical condition worsens. Pilate orders Jesus to be flogged 39 times as required by Roman law before crucifixion. Traditionally, the accused stood blood naked, and the flogging covered the area from the shoulders down to the upper legs. The whip consisted of several strips of leather. In the middle of the strips were metal balls that hit the skin, causing deep bruising. In addition, sheep bone was attached to the tips of each strip. When the bone makes contact with Jesus' skin, it digs into his muscles, tearing out chunks of flesh and exposing the bone beneath. The flogging leaves the skin on Jesus' back in long ribbons. By this point, he had lost a great volume of blood, which causes his blood pressure to fall and puts him into what's known as a hypovolemic shock, which is a dangerously low volume of blood. The human body attempts to remedy imbalances such as decreased blood volume, so Jesus' thirst in his body's natural response to his suffering, referenced in John chapter 19, verses 28. If he would have drank water at this point, his blood volume would have increased. The crown of thorns. Roman soldiers place a crown of thorns with thorns going up to 1 to 2 inches long on Jesus' head and a robe on his back. The robe helps the blood clot, similar to how you would put a piece of tissue on a cut, to prevent Jesus from sustaining more blood loss. As they hit Jesus in the head, the thorns from the crown push into the skin and he begins to bleed profusely. The thorns also cause damage to the nerve. This is called the trigeminal nerve. It's one of the most sensitive nerves in the body and supplies blood to the face, causing intense pain to his face and neck. As the people mock him, the soldiers also belittle Jesus by spitting on him. They rip the robe off Jesus' back and the bleeding starts afresh. Jesus' physical condition becomes critical. Due to severe blood loss without replacement, Jesus is undoubtedly in shock. As such, he is unable to carry the cross, and Simon of Cyrene executes this task. Carrying the cross. Crucifixion was invented by the Persians between 300 and 400 BC. It is quite possibly the most painful death ever invented by humankind. The English language derives the word excruciating from crucifixion, acknowledging it as a form of slow, painful suffering. Its punishment was reserved for slaves, foreigners, revolutionaries, and the vilest of criminals. Victims were nailed to a cross. However, Jesus' cross was probably not the Latin cross, rather a tau or a Roman cross, where the vertical piece, that's the vertical piece, remains in the ground permanently. The accused then carries only the horizontal piece, which is known as the patibulum, up the hill. Atop the patibulum lies a sign indicating that a formal trial occurred for a violation of the law. In Jesus' case, this reads, "This is the King of the Jews." So he was basically accused for blasphemy. The accused needed to be nailed to the patibulum while lying down, so Jesus is thrown to the ground, reopening his wounds, grinding in dirt, and causing bleeding. They nail his hands to the patibulum. The Greek meaning of hands includes the wrist. It is more likely that the nails went through Jesus' wrist. If the nails were driven into his hand, the weight of the arms would cause the nail to rip through the soft flesh. Therefore, the upper body would not be held to the cross. If placed in the wrist, the bones in the lower portion of the hand support the weight of the arms, and the body remains nailed to the cross. The huge nail, that's 6 to 7 inches long, damages or severs the major nerve to the hand known as the median nerve. That's basically the nerve popping out of your wrists. Upon impact, causing agony in terms of excruciating pain to both of Jesus' arms, to a point that this sort of nailing, when he was raised up, extended the length of his hands by 6 to 7 inches, which is unnatural. Once the victim is secured, the guard lifts the patibulum and places it on the stripes already in the ground. As it is lifted, Jesus' full weight pulls down on his nailed wrists and his shoulders, which are by this point dislocated. In this position, Jesus' arms stretch to a minimum of 6 to 7 inches longer than the original length, as I mentioned earlier. It is highly likely that Jesus' feet were nailed through the tops as often pictured. In this position, with the knees flexed as approximately 90 degrees, the weight of the body pushes down on the nails and the ankles support the weight. The nails would not rip through the soft tissue as would have occurred with the hands. Again, the nail would cause severe nerve damage. It severs the dorsal pedal artery of the foot and acute pain. The horror of crucifixion. Normally, to breathe in, the diaphragm, which is the largest muscle that separates the chest cavity from the abdominal cavity, must move down. This enlarges the chest cavity and air automatically moves into the lung. To exhale, the diaphragm rises up, which compresses the air in the lungs and forces out the air out. As Jesus hung on the cross, the weight of his body pulled down this diaphragm, and the air moves into his lungs and remains there, making it extremely hard for him to exhale. Jesus must push down on his nailed feet in order to be able to exhale. In order to speak, air must pass over the vocal cords during exhalation. The Gospels note that Jesus spoke 7 times from the cross. It is amazing that despite his pain, he pushes up to say, "Forgive them." The difficulty surrounding exhalation leads to a slow form of suffocation. Carbon dioxide builds up in the blood, resulting in a high level of carbonic acid in the blood. The body responds instinctively, triggering the desire to breathe. At the same time, the heart breathes faster to circulate available oxygen. The decreased oxygen causes damages to the tissues, and the capillaries begin leaking watery fluid from the blood into the tissues. This results in a buildup of fluid from the heart, which is known as a pericardial effusion, and lungs, which is the pleural effusion. The collapsing lungs, failing heart, dehydration, and the inability to get sufficient oxygen to the tissues essentially suffocate the victim. The decreased oxygen also damages the heart itself. In fact, Jesus' death was known to be caused due to a heart explosion, leading into a cardiac arrest. In severe cases of cardiac stress, the heart can even burst, which is known as a cardiac rupture, which is exactly what Jesus went through in the final moments on the cross. Jesus was most likely to have died by his heart exploding. After Jesus' death, the soldiers break the legs of the two criminals crucified alongside Jesus, causing them suffocation. Death would then be quicker. When they came to Jesus, he was already dead, so they did not break his legs. Instead, the soldiers pierced his side to assure themselves he was dead. In doing this, it is reported that blood and water came out, referenced in John chapter 19, verses 34, referring to the watery fluid surrounding the heart and the lungs. While these unpleasant facts depict a brutal murder, the depth of Christ's pain emphasizes the true extent of God's love for his creation. Learning the physiology of Christ's crucifixion is a constant reminder of the magnificent demonstration of God's love for humanity that was expressed that day in Calvary. This lesson enables us to participate in communion, the remembrance of his immense sacrifice, with a grateful heart. I am personally struck every time with the stunning realization that as flesh and blood human, Jesus felt every ounce of this execution. What greater love than this can a man have shed for all of mankind? The one who never ever sinned took the punishment for all of our sins. In those same moments, the temple curtain, the curtain that separated people from the Holy of Holies, was torn in two from top to bottom. The ripped cloth was a beautiful symbol for what Jesus came to do: tear down the wall of sin that separates people from God. Because Jesus died on the cross, our sin can be forgiven, we can be made holy, and we can step right into the presence of God with our prayers. But why did Jesus die? The arms of the cross point in 4 directions. Each one supplies a memory that represents a reason for why Jesus died. The cross points down towards Satan. This reminds us that Jesus died to defeat sin, death, and the devil. According to 1 John 3:8, the reason the Son of God appeared was to destroy the devil's work. Hebrews 2:14 adds that Jesus died to break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is, the devil. The cross also points upwards towards God. This reminds us that Jesus died to bear our guilt and satisfy his Father's wrath against sin. 1 John 4:10 asserts that God loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. 2 Corinthians 5:21 explains, God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. And the cross points sideways toward others. The 2 arm points in opposite directions. The first arm reminds us that Jesus is God and that we should love others as he loved us. 1 John 3:16 states, "This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters." The second arm reminds us that Jesus is human and that we must trust our Father as he did. 1 Peter 2:21 says, Jesus' suffering left us an example that we should follow in his steps. Putting it all together, the downward direction supplies the big picture. Why did Jesus die? To defeat sin, death, and Satan. The upward direction supplies the means, which is how did Jesus die? How did Jesus defeat these enemies? By bearing our penalty in our place. The sideway directions supply the application. What difference should the cross make in our lives? We must strive to love others as God has loved us and trust our Father when all seems lost. For love, Jesus died on a cross. What will you do for love today? Will you declare your love for Jesus and risk being made fun of? Or will you tell someone about Jesus and risk being laughed at or rejected? Will you risk trusting Jesus with all your whole heart? Because heroes love Jesus, the biggest hero of all time, no matter the risk. Thank you.